I was more concerned about going back to my mom and going back to the congregation and the elders of the congregation to say, hey, this happened. More worried about what they were saying than really what God would say.
Hello, this is Hope Kiesling from Hamul, California. I'm a retired police dispatcher. I'm a huge fan of Compelled. I've listened to every broadcast. I find the variety of people they interview so interesting, and then watching how God works in their lives and draws them unto himself. It's just incredible. And it's encouraging to know that he's at work in my life like this too. Enjoy today's episode.
I'm Paul Hastings, and you're listening to Compelled, where we use gripping, immersive storytelling to bring to life Christian testimonies from the kingdom of God, told by the people compelled to live for Him. This is the premiere episode of Season 9, and whether you've been listening since we first started the show 7 years ago, or if this is your first time joining us, I'm so glad that you've tuned in. Today, our guest is Stephen Matamoros, who grew up with a distorted view of Christianity, but eventually encountered the true God of the Bible, who promised to always be by Stephen's side, even in the darkest of times. So gather round, lean in, and join us for another compelling story from the kingdom of God. On a cold January day, I sat down with Stephen at his church at Lakeview Christian Center in New Orleans. He's been attending there for the last 13 years, but it's a far cry from how he was raised. Stephen was born in 1978, and from early on was exposed to a religious upbringing, but it wasn't the true gospel. Instead, it was twisted.
I grew up as a Jehovah's Witness, and, my whole family was in the Jehovah's Witness. My father was there, my mother was there. They teach you right from wrong. You read the Bible. So growing up, I guess as a kid, as always, you just trying to do what I'm supposed to do, trying to do what's right, trying to do good. And I figured if I did that, I'll be fine. It's a religion that's kind of surrounded on, it's surrounded on God, one God. They were very adamant about no Trinity or dying on a cross, like they don't believe in a cross. They believe that Jesus died on a tree. Their Jesus is not the creator, not part of the creator. Their Jesus is just the Son of God who, yes, will be, the Father will turn over the kingdom to him, but he's a created being, not the creator. So I think that's probably one of the biggest differences between the Jehovah's Witness and, let's just say, Christian teachings. They have the Watchtower Bible Society, which is the governing body that kind of sets this and that, But how does somebody get to heaven? So I want to say it's more of a workspace. Do what's right, being obedient and being faithful and discreet slave. They teach a lot of going preaching and spreading the news. But I want to say it's just more of a workspace. I can't say that I had like a real relationship with him back then. God to me back then was God. Yes, he was the creator. Like I believed that he was there. It was always just, this is what I'm supposed to do. This is who God is. God says to do this. Okay, I'm supposed to do it. I went out preaching door to door, giving out little talks, get on stage, in my early teens and giving little talks on stage. This is just what I thought I was supposed to do. God wasn't, it just wasn't as real. Like I knew he's there, like I knew there was a creator, but it was just more, he was just all the way up there. It was disconnection.
As he grew up, Stephen settled into a religious rhythm. He was a faithful witness for Jehovah. He did good deeds, told others about his faith, and was relatively content with his life. Stephen and God were good, or at least so he thought.
I was, for the most part, a rules follower until, I started getting to girls. And then that's just kind of like when it all changed. Probably around 16 years old, got involved with somebody, started seeing each other, and it got to a point where really I was just seeing her behind my mother's back because I couldn't really have that conversation with my mom because she just kind of shut it down. She's like, no, you can't do this, you can't do that. And, I was just like, well, I just said I just like her, So I feel like that kind of built a bigger wedge in between us. So, I think that's when I could say that I started rebelling. I tried to bring it up to her and she just kind of just shut it down quickly. And then that's when just went behind her back. I just lied, just started lying and just started making appointments to go, hey, let's go here, let's go there. And then one thing after the next, you start getting close. And then I think by the time I was 17, she got pregnant. She got pregnant when I was 17. She was a year older, so she was 18. And that changed a lot. We were scared. Like I remember, bringing her to go get a pregnancy test, I was a kid. Like, I remember bringing her and it's like, do it again, just take it again and just being scared and, having it to tell, her parents and my parents, it's a very scary thing, so, we ended up getting married. I was married at 17. My mom had to sign for me. Again, I was just trying to do the right thing. Like I figured that this is what I'm supposed to do. I'm having a kid come and I need to get married and I just want to do the right thing. We found our own place and stuff like that. And I guess as in any marriage, right, there's always kind of a lot of obstacles that kind of come across, especially at an early age. We were attending church together. We even got baptized into the Jehovah's Witness. And I think things are going well for the most part, but we had another child by the time I was 21. And then, I was doing a lot of traveling with work. And I think one night we traveled, was actually in Arkansas, traveling, and I met a girl and committed adultery that week that I was there. After that, it just started getting crazy, even crazier. It's just like I kept digging myself deeper into something. And I confessed to my wife at the time. Of course, she was heartbroken and, ended up moving back with my mom. I ended up getting what they call disfellowship out of the religion. They kind of they shun you or they stop talking to you or, only like the elders of the congregation can come and, talk to you. So it kind of got to a point where I just stopped going. Like I started to go and I wanted to go, I wanted to do what was the right thing, but the elders were very adamant that it's like I needed to stay with her. And I'm like, I can't stay with her. Like I just don't love her anymore. I can't. I think from so many years of the way we were living, I don't like confrontation. I like that peace. And I just said, hey, I don't want to be with you anymore. It was really, I look back, I'm like, man, how wrong I was. I was just, how I handled that situation was so selfish and immature, and I broke her heart big time. I was just doing my thing. I was more concerned about going back to my mom and going back to the congregation and the elders of the congregation to say, hey, this happened. More worried about what they were saying than really what God would say. Because in that religion, it's like, you're supposed to obey your superiors, so your elders were the superiors. So they're the ones who are supposed to guide you, pastor you. But I was probably more worried about just having to confront them than actually what God would think. We got divorced and I started seeing another woman, which is actually my wife now. Before we even got married, I always told her, like, my kids come first, second, and third. They're first, second, third place, So it was like the kids come first. And when I met my wife, I was actually still married, but we were separated. But I told her I had lied to my wife today. I just told her, hey, we're already separated, but we weren't even separated. I was actually dealing with 3 different women at that time, which was my wife today, my ex-wife, and the one that I had cheated on her with. And, it got too much. It's like it was too much for me to handle. So I had to start to give things up. And then I ended up choosing my wife today. Of course, for my ex-wife, just kept digging that dagger more into her, So we went through a lot of problems, because it's like I had 2 children. and my wife today, she knew I had these children, and she would, try to be friends with them and try to love on them. And in the beginning, it was all great, but as kind of life started going on, like it just started getting really, really hard. I would say that it could, part of it could be my ex-wife, using the kids against us, or this, a lot of drama that was kind of going through that. Kids said this about me, or they said this about my wife, it's just a lot of he say, she say kind of thing. And it's just, we were getting attacked from all sides. It's like we're all in this thing and we're just all getting attacked. And, it made my wife feel very uncomfortable. And I didn't know how to be a husband. I didn't know how to be a real husband.
Were you still going to the Kingdom Hall?
No, at this time I was already out.
What about your new wife? Was she religious at all?
No. I think she probably attended church a few times, more like, Christmas, that kind of stuff. But she was never really, attending church or anything. She was just kind of just doing her own thing. And, like I said, in the beginning, it was all good. like any time. It was all good. The kids loved her, and the very first time that I went to go pick up the kids and I had her with me, their mom, my ex-wife, she just didn't let it happen. She's like, no. She took her out the car, brought her back inside. So it was just a lot of conflict. And, I understand this now, and this is just a lot that she had to deal with too, right? And of course, I wasn't thinking about her. I was just thinking about myself. I was selfish.
Despite the tension between Stephen and his ex-wife, he tried his best to keep things afloat or to put them out of his mind. Stephen had remarried at 26, and the following year, his third child was born. And once again, he was still trying to do what he felt was right.
Fast forward a little bit, my wife and I had a child, her firstborn, and we're going by their mom's house to pick up school supplies because, they had school the next day. This was a Sunday. We're coming from like a baby shower or something. And the kids were in a car, and I told them, stay in the car, don't get out the car. I'm just going in and out. Well, my oldest daughter, Angelica, she didn't listen. And then my wife, Melinda, told her, hey, stay in the car, So anyway, she didn't listen. She got out the car. She went running inside, told her mom that Melinda said that, I don't know if she said that she can't come say hi to me or somewhere's in the lines where she couldn't she couldn't go say hi. So my ex-wife came out the house and she just came out screaming. She's like, you tell Melinda if my kids want to come say hi to me, they can come say hi to me whenever they want. And it was just like, it just started to escalate. And my daughter was like still inside. I'm like, what? Like that's not even what happened. So I go running after my daughter inside to go get her. And then my ex-wife and my wife are outside. My wife is, driving in the car, and she kind of like started screaming. So my wife got defensive because she's got the baby, her baby in the background, in the back seat. And by the time I got out, they were already on the ground fighting, like literally fighting, rolling over on the ground. So it just kept getting deeper and deeper. And I just didn't know what to do, and my wife was like, this is just too hard. I can't do this. And I can't go through this and stuff like that. And it's like, we already hit it. I'm like, babe, we can't, like, I was just trying to figure out how to make things right. We got with my ex-wife and her husband at the time. And, we got together and spoke, but there was just no working it out. It was just something, we were just in it, and there was just no getting out of it. So years go by and constant fighting. Kids are growing up and they're saying bad things about my wife or my ex-wife calling me. It was just constant fighting and drama. And I was just sick of it. Around this time, so I had my cousin Julio, okay, who back in them days, we would go out, we'd go party, we did drugs, we went to strip clubs, we did it all. Like we were just living it up, just doing this, doing that, doing whatever we wanted. We went out and partied and rent limos and pop bottles. And, there was a change in him. He was going to church. Like he was going to church on Saturdays. I'm like, you going to church on Saturday? Like we used to go out on Saturdays. Now you going to church? So I think at some point, he got saved. And he was trying to point me into that direction.
And he's not a Jehovah's Witness?
No. he saw us going through all these trials and tribulations. And he would always say, he's like, you need to go to church. You need Christ. They saw everything we was going through. He was always kind of like pointing me. November of 2011, that was Julio and Jen's wedding. And I remember Pastor Peter, he was the one who married them. Well, I remember at the rehearsal dinner, it's just my wife and I sitting at the table. And my wife's like, don't let him sit there. Don't let him sit there. Don't let us sit there. And I'm dumb. I'm not even paying attention. Next thing you know, pastor's coming. Oh, can I sit here? So he sat down, and we never knew what God was doing. Like, we look back now, I'm like, that was all God. So, and he was super nice. It's not like he was super nice to us, just having little conversations and asking questions about us. And so, that's the night I met Pastor Peter. And then Julio, his wife was a Christian and talking to me about God and stuff like that. And just trying to, I'm good. I pray, that's what I would say. Like, I would pray to God, when I need him.
But although Stephen acknowledged that there was a God, practically, it didn't mean much. He was still trying to fix things his own way. But the harder he tried, the results became increasingly disastrous. More on that after the break. Welcome back to Compelled. Stephen Matamoros had grown up as a Jehovah's Witness, but eventually left. Yet there were still leftover vestiges from that theology. Stephen claimed that he knew God and even prayed, but in reality, he was just trying to do whatever he thought was right. His second marriage was already difficult, but just a month after meeting a Christian pastor at his cousin's wedding, his marriage would reach a new low, this time stemming from an argument about who held the higher priority in his life, his kids or his wife.
There was another big fight, more so between my wife and I. We were coming from a birthday party, from her grandma's birthday party, and we were supposed to go pick up the kids. Well, she wouldn't let me. She wouldn't let me go get them. And we were like in a car. I'm like, give me the keys. She's like, no. Like, it just got escalated very quick. It escalated so much that it got physical. Okay? It got physical. She laying her hands on me. I laid my hands on her. We both ended up a night in jail, and that was it. That was like another tipping point. She was super upset, of course. I mean, we were both upset, because we were both part of it, but I was never one to like lay a hand on a woman. Like, I was just like almost shocked with myself and shamed. Because again, I was always trying to do what's right, treat somebody right. So I was just lost. I was just so lost. I remember being in jail just writing a letter to my wife, just writing things out.
What were you saying in that letter?
It was just more of, honestly, it's like I never had her back. I never put her first, so it was more like, hey, I know I need to do this. I need to do that. It was more like, I can't even remember everything I wrote in that letter, but it was just like probably talking bad about my ex-wife, saying, she did this and she did that, and just trying to make it up to her. She left. She went to go stay with her mom after going to jail, after that incident. And this was like around Christmas time, because I remember her going to a Christmas party by herself because she wouldn't let me come, obviously, with good reason. And it was just like all around that time. And so one Sunday, I just didn't know what else to do. One Sunday, I decided to come here to church. I came to Lakeview. I didn't know what else to do. I felt something needed to change. So something, I guess you could say there was a light here. There's just something was drawing me to here, to this church. That very Sunday, I can't even remember what the pastor was saying. All I can remember is it felt like he was talking to me, like God was talking to me. Like whatever he was saying was piercing my heart. I'm like, how can they know this? How could they know that I'm suffering right now? How can they know how I'm feeling right now? Shameful or this or that. I just remember feeling that God was speaking. And that was probably the first time ever.
Over the next few weeks, Stephen was intrigued by the things he was being taught about God on Sunday mornings. And shortly after, he was invited to a special class at the church called Alpha.
Alpha program is a 10-week course, which is just gospel-centered, who is God, who is Jesus. Very simple, basic, gospel-based program, to learn who he is. It would be for a 10-week course, and it will be on Tuesday nights. I think they'll have dinner. They'll provide dinner for 6:30. You'll eat, and then Pastor Frank is the one who leads Alpha, so he'll speak for 45 minutes to an hour, and then they'll have a table discussion. You'll be assigned to a table. There'll be a table leader. You'll have your little Alpha book that's just kind of basically everything that he's talking about, just kind of going off of that. And I did the 10-week course. We did ended up getting back together. We did start going to church every Sunday. I don't know if it was every Sunday, but we did start going to church. She was very adamant. She didn't want to go. Okay. I was like, no, we got to go. Like, we got to do something. I remember going to Alpha, and I remember my wife calling me. It's like 8:45, 9 o'clock. She's like, you still there? She'll be upset because I'm still out at church. And we started coming, and, we hear the message, and nothing's really like clicking yet. I did the Alpha course, did pretty much. And I want to say, I even thought I was saved, because they talked about that. Fast forward, I got real busy with work, stopped going to church, just kind of stopped. We would take family vacations to Destin, Fort Walton Beach every Labor Day weekend. And so my daughter at the time was probably around 14, 15 years old. And I remember we had punished her because we took her phone away because of something she did, or, something she did to her younger brother. And it was like a form of discipline, so we took her phone away. We hide it. And then next thing you know, we're at the beach. And I think, she probably went, she's like, hey, I got to go to the bathroom. I'm like, okay, we're like on the beach, and it's like a safe area. So it just kind of runs back. And next thing you know, she comes out with her phone. I'm like, what are you doing? Like, we just took that away from you. She's like, well, mom said that, she always went running to her mom, my ex-wife. She knew how to play sides. And kids are smart. Like, kids learn that right away, how they can play this, especially when kids who are going through divorced parents. So to discipline her again, we used to go to, or we went to like a go-kart place, that we would go at least once that time, those trips. I'm like, you're not going. You're just going to have to sit there, because we had the other 3 children, so I'm like, we're taking them and let them, but to discipline her, she's like, no. Well, my brother ends up giving her a ticket to go. And when my wife saw that, she kind of just started saying something to my brother. And then my brother flipped out. He's like, you are not their mother. He just started going off. You are not their mother, this and that. And they just started going at it. And it was huge. Like,
right,
it was
in
just
front of the whole...
in front of everybody. Like, it was just going back and forth and this. And, at this time, we're like getting ready to leave. She was crazy upset. And she was done. She's like, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. I can't keep going this way. Obviously, the kids are first, second, and third. She's like, I can't do this no more. So, she threw that at me on the way home. We were driving home. It was a long ride. It was a long ride home. And she was just, talking. It's like, I'm done. I can't do this. Like, there's been many attempts, conversations that divorce was brought up. I'm like, we can't get divorced. Like, we can't go through this all over again. We'll put Eric and Jocelyn, those are the younger kids, through this that they're going through. Like we can't just decide to do that. And I just remember telling her, I'm like, no, we're going back to church, because we had stopped attending for months by this time. She listened. She came. That very next Sunday, I remember it was Pastor Evan May was preaching. He was talking about kids and teenagers and how messy they can be. And I remember getting in a car after and telling my wife, I'm like, babe, God's talking. Like, he's talking to us. Did you just hear that message? That's exactly what we just went through. This is super weird. I was just dumbfounded. Like, I didn't get it, She's like, it's just a coincidence. They probably got other people going through the same thing. I'm like, no, like this is weird. So it's like, so they had an Alpha course just starting. They had in the fall season. So they had one that had just started. We missed the first one. I'm like, we're going. And guess what? She came. Then God just started to become more alive around that time. I started to make appointments with Pastor Peter for marriage counseling right after that. And we started attending Alpha. And I remember talking to one of the clericals that were up there. Is there a way I can make an appointment, with the pastor? She's like, oh, yeah. So, I made an appointment, sat down with him.
Both of you together?
No, it's just me. She would not go. She did the Alpha. She was going to church on Sundays, but she's like, I'm not going. So I went by myself first. And he even asked me, are you saved? I'm like, yeah, I'm saved. I'm good. And I want to say the very next Sunday, that day was October 14, 2012. They had an altar call. I just remember, he's like, there's someone here. There's someone here. And when I heard someone, I heard one. Okay? And that someone was me. And I just got up. I don't know why. Like I just felt like I had to get up. Like I just had to get up and confess. I just felt God was talking to me again. It's not a coincidence. Like, how can they know all of this? How can they know what I'm feeling? How can they know what I'm going through? So I just felt what God was telling me, get up. And I got up and I received prayer. I remember the two men who prayed over me that day. And my wife, I think she had a hangover that day, but I still brought her. I'm like, we're going. And she missed the whole thing. She was like out in the lobby, because she just wasn't feeling well. And she remembers a couple coming to talk to her. She's like, that's your husband, And, she just had no clue what was going on. So I got saved. And I remember when I got saved, I just remember this peace that came over me and a whole bunch of weight that just came off of me. Like I just felt light, like God just took it all. And I just remember I was in a car and I just remember I'm forgiven. All those things that we went through, all those things that I did, I wasn't good. And I'm forgiven. I'm a sinner saved by grace through faith in Jesus Christ. And my life has been changed completely.
But as amazing as God's work was in Stephen's life that day, God wasn't done yet.
If God didn't speak to me that Sunday, and then that Sunday after that big old fight, when that was like the last straw, that Melinda's like, I'm done. Like, that's it, with my brother and the family and everybody was kind of going against my wife. If, that Sunday that we came and he was talking about children and this and that, like, if he wasn't speaking to us then, like, I don't know. We probably wouldn't have been together. We probably went through a divorce all over again. We would have had two more divorced children, and a divorced family. We fought hard. I fought hard to try not to bring it to that, but I had to come a place to surrender. I had to give up. I had to wave that white flag and just give it to God. And until I did that, is when he started to put everything back together the way it's supposed to be. Until I did that is when I learned to put my wife first before my children. God first, of course. But here on this earth, your wife comes before your children, not the other way around. I just remember every single day getting on my hands and knees praying for her. Every single morning, I would just get in the bathroom and just pray and pray and pray and pray for our situation. Because at this time, my kids wouldn't even come around. They didn't want to come around. And my kids were everything to me. So I'm like trying to figure out how to make this work again. I just remember praying for her, praying for her life, praying for my children, praying for God to just restore everything. She saw a change in me. She saw something was so different. I would even intentionally put the Christian music on, K-Love, on her radio. That way she could listen to it. You know, she hated that. She hated it, you know. But that weekend, that Alpha weekend, God was talking to her. And, you know, it was a time where it's time of prayer and this and that. And I remember, you know, we're just there listening to the prayer. But next thing you know, Frank comes behind my wife. And he's like, can I pray for you? And she starts bawling down crying. She didn't have the courage to lift up her hand, but she wanted to receive prayer. And God graciously brought Frank over there to pray for her. It started to become real for her. Right around this time, we started to see Pastor Peter together. December 7th, 2012, she got saved. I want to say it started in his office, but I remember him calling me. He's like, you have someone right here that needs your undivided attention, and she's coming to see you right now. You know, I stopped whatever I was doing. I think I was getting lunch with my brother and my cousin, and then she came and met me there. And we went to my office, which is not too far away, but she was just like, you know, I'm saying yes. You know, like I'm saying yes. She's saying yes to Christ. She's saying I do. And I remember praying with her, over her. And I just remember the presence of God just being there. And it changed her life too. And slowly, God started putting our marriage back together the way it's supposed to be. And he started to put our family back together. And things started to change.
Unlike the first time when Stephen had begun attending church after his night in jail, but then eventually stopped a few months later, this time, Stephen and his wife Melinda were fully committed. But the path forward would be far from easy, which you'll hear about right after the break. Welcome back to Compelled. Stephen Matamoros and his wife Melinda had become born-again Christians, but God was still doing a work of sanctification, restoring not only their immediate marriage and family, but also their past.
Things were changing. You know, things were changing in our lives. I remember my daughter, Angelica, when I first got saved, you know, she was just like, I just want my dad back, because she just saw a difference in me. I'm like, I'm never going back. I'm never going back to that person. I'm your dad. I'm here. And I'm always going to be here for you, but I'm never going back. I remember saying at some point, I need to go to her and ask for forgiveness, to my ex-wife. Okay? And I want to say this was during Alpha, because I remember my wife always had this fear that I was going to run back to her. And she was, you know, concerned about that at that time. But I just remember saying, like, I have to go to her. Like, I have to go to her. And, you know, one of the days that we're dropping off the kids over there, I'm like, look, I need to talk to you. And I just told her, I'm like, look, please forgive me for everything. Like, I know I didn't do things the way I should have. And she forgave me. She said she forgave me a long time ago. But, you know, I had to go there and ask for forgiveness. I just had to go and confess and say, please, you know, please forgive me. You know, I had to make things right. That was probably late 2012. My wife had she had unforgiveness in her heart with my ex-wife. I want to say the following Christmas, we went to their house and had Christmas with them. Yes. And I remember pulling up in their front yard. Well, my wife was driving at that time. And, you know, my wife was nervous. She was like super nervous because it was hard for her, you know, and having unforgiveness too, it was hard for her. And my daughter, who was, 2 years old, I don't know, like she was young, she was tiny. She told my wife, she's like, what are you afraid for? And as soon as she said that, she just started laughing and stopped crying. I'm like, bae, that's not just our daughter. That's prophetic. Like, that's God talking. He's trying to let you know that he's here. We went inside. They spoke. They started working it out, you know? She was asking my ex-wife for forgiveness. And that blew her mind, my ex-wife, from what I've heard. She never told me directly, but from what I've heard from friends and family, that just blew her mind. She's like, she didn't get it. So at some point, we're all attending church, you know, all of my children, all my 4 children, were all attending church, coming regularly, starting to serve in church, you know. my younger kids are, doing things with the younger kids here, and we're just part of this church, and life is good. God is good. God has done great things.
4 years went by. Stephen and his wife were still faithfully following the Lord. And while their lives had not become a walk in the park, at least it was no longer the nightmare it used to be. His 3 younger children still lived at home, while his oldest, his daughter Angelica, was 20, living nearby on her own, where she had a steady job at the courthouse. And one afternoon, just a few weeks before Thanksgiving, she called him.
I remember my daughter calling me, saying she wanted to talk to me, and I was kind of like still at work. I'm like, hey, baby, I'll call you right back. Let me just finish doing what I got to do, and I'll call you back, She's like, okay, call me back. I tried calling her back, and she just didn't answer, I figured she'll call me at some point, This was a Monday. I think I'm at home watching Monday Night Football, fell asleep on a couch, and then next thing you know, they're knocking at the door. It was her stepfather and my son. And they're just coming to tell me that she's gone. I'm like, what do you mean she's gone? She died from a car accident. I'm like, well, no. Like, what do you mean she's dead? Where is she? She's like, I don't know. I'm like, well, what do you mean you don't know? How can you tell me she's dead if she's not? She's like, they said she's dead. I'm like, well, where did they take her? She's like, I don't know. I'm like, I don't understand this. Like, my wife has a family member that works in that parish. Parish is kind of like a county, is a police officer. So I remember her calling. I remember her where she's sitting down. I remember her being on the phone, and I just remember her putting her head down because it was true. And it's like, I didn't want to believe it, but it's, God is so good, because at the same time, it's like this peace just came over me. There's just peace telling me that he has her, that he has her. And I remember looking into my son's eyes, which is Stephen Jr. And I'm like, he's got her. I know he's got her. Like, I know she's not just gone, like I know he has her, that she's in heaven. And I didn't get it because I was constantly praying for their salvation, constantly praying for them that they would receive Christ. And, we see with our own eyes. Our eyes don't see anything. Our eyes only see the physical. But I just knew God had her. And God was so gracious that week. Like, he was so close to me. To feel his embrace, I just don't know another way to explain it. Shortly after, probably the very next day, my wife is going through Facebook, and my daughter had posted a song on her Facebook page, which was Oceans, Hillsong, Oceans, which is a prayer. God lead me, lead me. I can't remember the details of that song, but I just know that song is like a prayer, like you're talking to God direct. And I'm like, I just felt like God was telling me, like, I have her. We're pulling up at lunch, to go have lunch, with my wife. And, we're trying to go through all of this. We're trying to manage all of this funeral arrangements and all of this. But we're stopping, to get some lunch somewheres. And Jennifer, my cousin's wife, calls my wife. And she's like, look, I got to tell you something. At the same time, while she's calling her, I'm on the phone with Pastor Peter. And he's like asking me questions about her and salvation. And he's just kind of like reassuring me. She's like, she never rejected Christ, because she was coming to church. She went to Alpha, both of those children, the older children, went to Alpha. And as I'm having this conversation with him, Jennifer is telling my wife, Melinda, that, I have to tell you this, like, Angelica's been calling me about praying to Jesus, like how to pray to Jesus and how to do it. And it was just like confirmation. The word says that all who call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. So I just felt in the worst of my moments, losing your child, but I felt so much comfort and peace in that. And she got to meet him face to face before I did.
How do you think you would have responded to Angelica's death if you had not been a Christian?
Angry. I probably would have been more angry. I think that was something, like I remember my oldest son saying, that he noticed something different in me was I was more patient, because Latin blood. So it's like we're known for getting angry. So I probably would have been more angry. I don't know. I probably would have turned to alcohol and drugs just to dull it out. It's what I did before with other things. I think that's how I got through all those other years of suffering, before Christ. Went through a lot of alcohol and drugs. I don't know how I could do it without him. Like I told my daughter many years ago, I'll never go back to my old self. A lot was happening around that time. I feel like a lot of other family members were getting saved around that time. I just felt God's Spirit was just with me, working in me and through me for me and for others, and definitely a rough time. But, this church just gathered around me and took care of me and took care of our family. And I remember going to a men's prayer, like literally the Friday after. I don't know how I did it, but just crying out to him. They were all gathering around me to pray. And I just started crying out to him, praying, but also knowing that I can't go against his will, that was his will to have her. And I had to accept it. And as hard it is to accept, but it's okay because he's with her. What other better place to be than with Jesus Christ himself? So that was definitely a rough patch. And I know it was a rough patch for all of us. It was a rough patch for her mom, my ex-wife, because she asked me if I had peace. I'm like, look, I have peace because I know the word of God and what it says. And I think I was searching for him. And God says, search and you will find. God says, knock and I'm knocking, open the door. He was there before I even knew it. Even when I didn't even see him for who he was. Like he was always there. The scripture says that before the foundations were laid, he has chosen us. I'm just so grateful. And this is, I just pray and teach my children about Christ and try to be a good example to them and just keep pushing forward in Christ. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. All things. Even going through a death of a child. Things that a parent never wants to go through. It's not supposed to be that way. It's supposed to be the other way around. But God's timing is God's timing.
That verse that you're mentioning there, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Normally, it's athletes or people that have just done something big or whatever. Normally, there's the ones quoting that. But actually, that verse in the Bible, it's all in the context of suffering.
Yes. Paul writing that in prison, beaten, left for dead. And he's learned to be content in much and in little. And he could do all things through Christ.
As our conversation wrapped up, I asked Stephen what words he would share with a listener walking through a terrible trial, perhaps one similar to his, whether it's a struggling marriage or the devastating loss of a loved one.
Trust God. We just have to have faith and trust that He's got a perfect plan for us, for our children. It's a tough question. Even still today. To me, it's just Jesus is the answer. We just need that relationship with him. When we have that relationship, we know the truth. Everything we feel, everything we hear, feelings are off of emotions, feelings on how I feel, but we got to know the truth. We got to know God's word, because there's so many promises in there that are for us, that he's given to us. And that's why I say just trust. Trust in him, trust in his word, because he's faithful.
Stephen, thanks for sharing, man. We appreciate you coming on the show and sharing what the Lord has done in your life, how he's transformed you, how he's redeemed your marriage, restored your relationship with others in your family that were broken off. It's so encouraging, man.
Amen.
Amen.
God is good.
In the Bible, the book of Judges ends on a somber note, observing that everyone in those days was doing whatever they thought was right in their own eyes. And in a similar fashion, Stephen kept trying to do whatever he thought was the right thing to do, just one step after the other. And yet, without Christ, it was fruitless, and the dysfunction only became worse. But the remarkable transformation in his marriage and in his family's trajectory occurred after Stephen and his wife gave their lives to Jesus. And I'll be honest, I don't know the personal circumstances of whatever situation you might be in, and I can't promise that God is going to totally upend and change everything in your life. But fortunately for you, you don't have to rely on my promises. Instead, you can rely on the promises of God. When it comes to eternal salvation and the security of your soul, the Bible is pretty clear in Romans 10:13, which teaches that everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. And everyone means everyone, which includes Stephen, his wife, Angelica, and you. And if you know someone who would be encouraged by this story, then please send it to them. It's episode 92 of Compelled with Stephen Matamoros. And if you'd like to see some behind-the-scenes photos of Stephen and his family, just visit our website, compelledpodcast.com, and search for this episode. Now, if this is your first time listening to Compelled because a friend recommended it, or you stumbled across it online, or you found us through our brand new radio broadcast on American Family Radio, then welcome. We've been creating this podcast for 7 years now, and we have almost 100 other stories you can enjoy right now on demand for no cost. Just visit compelledpodcast.com or follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any other podcast app. And again, if you're looking for Stephen's story in particular, it's episode 92 with Stephen Matamoros. You know, we give these stories away and we don't charge for them. God is the author of each of these testimonies and we just help retell it. But candidly, one of the ways we're able to continue doing this work is through the generous financial support of listeners like you. A couple months ago, we announced our 2025 fundraising goal, which was $60,000, all of which goes directly towards paying for travel, editing, sound design, scripting, equipment, software, and everything else that goes into making and distributing these stories. Well, we announced that $60,000 goal a couple months ago, and as of today, when I'm recording this audio right now, we've raised just under $45,000, which means we're almost 75% of the way there. If you'd like to help us across the finish line, then just visit compelledpodcast.com/donate, where you can make a one-time or monthly donation. There's also a live tracker there showing our progress. And if you become a monthly partner for any amount, then you'll get access to our entire behind-the-scenes library, which includes the full-length raw interviews from each of our guests. Those can range anywhere from 2 to 4 hours and are full of additional insights and stories that we didn't have time to include on our regular show. And as a monthly partner, you'll also get early access to all of our brand new episodes a week early without ads. To get started, just visit compelledpodcast.com/donate. Today's story was edited by Will Jackson, sound engineering by Tim Hull, and our associate producer is my dear wife, Sarah Hastings. Stay tuned for a sneak peek from our next episode with Ron Husband. Ron grew up in California during the 50s and 60s, and he'd heard about Jesus, but he'd also heard about aliens and ancient civilizations. What was the truth? Well, perhaps he'd find it in the pages of a Bible that he had conveniently stolen from a hotel years ago. And unbeknownst to him, he was also going to be invited to draw moving pictures for a random children's company called Disney? I'm your host, Paul Hastings, and you've been listening to Compelled. We'll be back with another compelling story 2 weeks from now. We'll see you then.
I went away to college and said being bombarded with, different worldviews. I guess they call worldviews of, religions and things of that nature. And thinking, oh, the Hare Krishnas, that I remember at college in Nevada, it's, chanting, Krishna, Krishna, Hare Krishna, and sort of seeing that sort of play out. I say, it's interesting, but it's nothing that would really encourage me, or it's just not just a passing fancy fad.